So good evening, everybody. We're going to get going just because it's 5:37. Seems like a good time to start. And we're going to go for 1 hour tonight because I think a number of people have meetings right after this. So I will let Rolly welcome everybody, but I'll just introduce myself quickly. Some people I've met in 2018. My name's Frances Maika, and I do communications work for the regional district. I'm coming up to 3 years with the regional district now, and been doing this kind of stuff for a lot of years. So I just handed out a paper that I always start meetings with, just because I think it's good to check in with people if we want the meeting to work well for everyone here. So I'll just go through them quickly. It's just some principles I follow whenever I facilitate. My main role is just the process. I'm not speaking on any topic today. So I'll help people make sure your questions are answered and make sure everybody gets a chance to ask what you need to ask. And if you don't, then help you find a way to follow up after if we run out of time. So participation principles, super basic. You're here to participate, so am I. Listening, learning, speaking, or inquiring. Whatever that means to you is obviously fine. If you do choose to speak, you'll get a chance to speak without interruption. If you do choose to speak, you'll do so with the knowledge time's limited. Everybody needs a chance to be able to participate as best they can. You'll speak for yourself, I'll speak for myself, or on behalf of a group that you formally represent. And here's the one that I think is really important. If we can think about focusing all comments and questions on the topics and issues rather than anybody individually, like anybody up here or anybody over here, and just making sure we're talking about topics that are super important to people. There's a lot of emotion attached to all of this kind of stuff, and I totally respect that. So we just need to think about, let's talk about the issues and keep it on specific topics. If you don't understand something, just ask for clarification. I'll skip number 7. We've got a bit of an agenda, but we're always going to ask you what order you want to talk about things in. Obviously, you got the right to disagree with anything said, or agree or whatever, and just accept the responsibility to present alternatives that might work for you or for other people in the group. Participate constructively, listen, speak your truth. Do what you can to work the process, make sure the process works for everybody. That includes everybody up here, it includes everybody in the whole group here. And then just recognize that my only role here tonight is to manage the process so it works for everybody. And I'll do that to the best of my ability so that it's a positive, productive discussion in the sense that you feel that the process actually allowed you to either comment on something or ask a question or express what you had to express. Okay? And with that, I will turn it over to Director Rory Russell.
Thanks, Francis. Are you guys okay if I don't use the mic? Or thumbs down if anybody wants me to be louder. Thumbs up, I guess, if you want me to be louder. And I'll use the mic. Otherwise, I'll set it aside for now. So thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. As Francis said, this is a pretty sensitive issue, and there's, it's been an ongoing conversation. Appreciate all your time, and hopefully we can make this as kind of efficient as possible. The plan today is to go over, to talk a little bit about how in local government we make decisions around temporary protective measures, so such as over there at Darren's place, and I know there's a lot of questions around what happened there, why it happened, and so on. To talk a little bit about an update on DMAP. We've also got a lot of questions around why hasn't there been anything done here for this particular neighborhood from the DMAP application particularly. And then really the bulk of the conversation, the goal here from my perspective is certainly to have an open dialogue around what the future kind of vision might be and what we can work towards in terms of a future for this neighborhood. There's no, as I was saying to Gabe just beforehand, it's nice to come into these meetings with a real positive kind of solution to be able to propose. We don't have anything like that, so this is a difficult conversation, but hopefully we can collaboratively share some ideas. We will then take that back, work on that, and have a follow-up meeting where we can dig a little deeper into some of the technical answers to your questions and so on. So, I'm Rolly Russell. I'm the director for Rural Grand Forks, which is, if you know, just this very southern end of Johnson's Flats. And I will turn it over to Brian to introduce himself.
Yeah, Brian Taylor, Mayor of Grand Forks. Thank you.
And so the City of Grand Forks line, for those of you that don't know, is, there's about a dozen properties probably south of the line, and the rest of Johnson Flats is in the City of Grand Forks. Everett?
And I'm Everett Baker, and I'm a constituent assistant to your MLA, Linda Larson.
You, Duncan.
I'm Duncan Redfearn. I'm the CAO with City of Grand Forks.
And Mark Andison, Chief Administrative Officer with the Regional District.
Hiding behind the tree.
Hi, hiding behind the tree, Kevin McKinnon, Communications for the city, and I'm here to make sure that the speaker that we're not using is working.
Okay, and again, just let us know if you're having any issues hearing. Okay, we have that as our agenda, those 3 items. We're willing to talk about other things, and so I'd ask the group if that sounds reasonable, that we go through that conversation around Darren's Place and temporary protective works. Then we talk a little bit about DMAP, and we spend most of our hour talking about what the future kind of scenarios might be. Go ahead.
As we go through each section, is it all right to have a chance for questions?
I think that our understanding is certainly that this is an open conversation. So the first 2 pieces are more informative than, like, they're not meant to be, we're not debating about what DMAP is going to do, for example, but the happy to have questions anytime in that. And then the like I say, the bulk of the conversation is meant to be around what the future holds, and that is absolutely supposed to be a discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah?
Could we also discuss the other end of Johnson Flats, like on 12th Street?
Yeah, so the notion is that we wanted to give, like, this particular site was contentious here. The idea is that we're going to talk about the future of Johnson Flats on the whole. The whole area of Johnson Flats that's in the floodplain, essentially. This is a convenient example over here, and because a lot of people had questions around why those decisions were made and who was making those decisions as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I live down on the end of 19th there. And I was told by Graham, who's not here, and Justin 3 times they were going to build a berm.
Yeah.
And then on the 12th hour, they pulled the pin on it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the water wants to come here. Right?
Yeah.
And like if that berm wasn't there, that's there right now, 2018, it would have been a wall of water down here that was already down here, right? So I just want to know what happened all of a sudden, because they came that morning at 10 o'clock, said anything over 25 millimeters, we're building a berm, don't sandbag, we're looking after you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we're not doing it.
Yeah. So perfect segue into that first piece, which is really like what is the decision process that we go through? What the, when we're bringing in, so that's the emergency response team basically making decisions, the deputy inspector of dikes contributing to those decisions. How do we get to those decisions? So, I printed out and brought the BC Emergency Response Management System. There's this little, I don't know, there's 8 of them or something. These are the priorities, for example, that when we're in emergency response that we use to help guide those decisions. And I'm just going to read them out because that's the same, it applies for temporary protective works like that. And those decisions are, number 1, provide for the safety and health of all responders. Okay, so that's number 1, first and foremost, when we're in the middle of responding to an emergency, most important. Save lives, reduce suffering, protect public health, protect government infrastructure, protect property, protect the environment, and reduce economic and social loss. So those are prioritized decision informing tools, essentially, that we use in order to make a decision like that, right? So there, we go through something. We've also got a more local kind of version to help explain that we will share, to help explain how we're making those decisions when we're going through that, right? And this has been, staff just pulled this together in part to help talk about this, and that's, when we're deciding on a site like that, it's first up, okay, what's the consequence of no action? So what if we don't do anything? What's the risk here? So an assessment of what's the risk of that flood. When we look at this year, this 2020 event, we were getting forecasts for anywhere from 1 and 5 year flood levels to well past what we saw in 2018. So we had these wildly fluctuating flood forecasts, which help inform, well, what's the risk if we don't do anything? What's the risk of property damage? then in that same space, what's the risk to life? Or are we running the risk of endangering people by not installing protective work, for example, not installing the temporary berm? Okay, because again, it's temporary, meaning that if we did secure the funding to install it, we have to remove it afterwards as well, right? It's not a install and leave it in place situation. That makes sense?
No. Ludicrous.
No.
Okay, yeah, I thought maybe not.
Well, it's kind of a waste of money. Why would you do that? Why not? Because, like, that's an issue. I'm an issue over there with my neighbor.
Yeah.
The water wants to come over there.
So like, understood. Yeah. So part of the risk is that if we install a temporary berm there, right? It's not being engineered. It's not being designed nearly to the same specifications it would be if we were doing that work, like the downtown protective works that are going on or initiated right now with DMAP, right? When we're in emergency response, we're doing things that are more urgent, and they don't have this. We don't have the same ability to install a dike. We can't install a dike, for example, in the middle of freshet. Does that make sense?
So why wasn't it done after 2018 when the report was done by what's his name? Dobson.
Yeah.
It said that there was 1,300 meters of riverfront in the south of Johnson Flats.
Yeah.
So if that would have been done after the Dobson report, we wouldn't be here at this point in time.
And we were shown a schedule that it would be done. The first schedule timeline was to be done by February of this year before freshet. So I'm curious, why wasn't it done?
So I'm happy for anybody else to jump in here. Well, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, frankly, okay, so we'll come to some of those questions in just a moment. But realistically, so right there, so if that protective work, if the flood forecast that we're getting, let's say we're anticipating that that's going to cost $30,000 in property damage, and that temporary protective work is going to cost $150,000. Then who can justify saying yes to a temporary protective work that then in turn has to get removed after it's done? Right?
We can't,
that's
because we're the ones that have the river coming through our whole property.
Right. Yeah. So, but money is not unlimited, right?
It's not that. It's that it was there, it broke, put it back.
But who's responsible for it?
But if it didn't go back, we would have had nothing. So we would have been gone.
And part of the premise for the conversation around the future. Sorry, I have to keep moving around to get around the tree. The part of the kind of conversation about what's the future scenario here, right? So the regional district funding model is we do whatever people need to be done, essentially. But whoever, and it doesn't matter if you're in the city of Grand Forks or rural Grand Forks, right? The regional district is the umbrella over all of us, rural Grand Forks, city of Grand Forks. The people who receive the benefit pay for it. So that means that so in that same Dobson report, right, there's an estimate that that's going to be a $15 million project. So who is on the hook for that $15 million? It's not all of taxpayers. It's those people that receive that benefit.
Okay, Roy, I want to interject here because I'm looking at the news release from Canada and BC when we got the $55 million, I think it was, $50 million. And right in this article it says, the project also involves reinforcing 1,300 meters of riverbank. Now, how can that change when the government, BC and Canada, has agreed to give you the funding? How can you change the criteria?
So I don't think the criteria have changed.
Do you want to speak to that, Mike?
I can speak to that one. Just for clarification, that does not mean a dike. And what has been approved there is shoreline stabilization, the bank stabilization.
Yep.
So that's a combination of riprap and bioengineering, so planting trees and those sorts of things, to ensure that there's less erosion or try to stop the erosion that's happening. But it's not flood protection in the form of a dike that would or a berm that would protect from the flow over the land.
Yep,
So just to make that clear. And in terms of the timeline, that's what was shown in that the chart in terms of timelines, that shoreline protection. And it initially had shown that work being done through late 2019 and into 2020. But, and Duncan can speak to this as well, the DMAF funding has really just been put in place in the last couple of months in terms of the city receiving that funding. So that's had a lot to do with how quickly a lot of the projects could be implemented. So there's a couple of factors there. The dike that was raised as a potential option in the Dobson report, and Rowley has commented quite rightly, it was in that report estimated to be $15.5 million. And he really threw out that as an option for this area because the cost-benefit analysis, he said, would come in as negative. So in terms of getting funding for a piece of infrastructure like that, the chances are very remote that we would get any sort of federal or provincial funding because the cost of putting in the dike is actually more than the improvements that are being protected within Johnson Flats.
Well, that doesn't make any sense.
So,
well, what is that money for?
So,
for a second, first of all, the question I asked and he asked was, why did you not do the protective work that you've described with the riprap and the plants, and why? And the answer you said, and you can correct me if I've got it wrong, but that you didn't get any money till 2 months ago. So that means the people in North Ruckle didn't get bought out till 2 months ago. No money was moving hands in Grand Forks till 2 months ago. I just want to know, is that like we needed that first question answered?
Yeah. So,
you guys want to come in a little bit?
We're kind of hiding.
Yeah, come into the shadows.
Even into the shade.
Usually come into the light, but come into the shadows.
Save my bald head. So yeah, I've been here 3 months, and since I've been here, the money has arrived, and a portion of it. So we're running at about a $56 million budget right now for the entire project. We're slated to receive 50 million, give or take, and so the city right now has a gap of about 5.5 that we're working on trying to close that gap up over budget based on the buyouts, based on a formula that was approved in January, and that's when the money started changing hands in January.
Okay, so you have most of the money now?
We have 22 million of about 56, and we don't have a signed agreement from the federal government, and we've been on them and they've committed to it, but they have not signed the agreement.
So included in that money is money for Johnson Flats. That's federal.
So and I can jump in at that point too. So I think it was last year, for example, even we applied to the province to get funding because we need to know it was money. So it was money to protect shorelines in a number of different places, right? Some of it is not specified at all. It's simply to say high risk areas. Some of it, for example, around here is to say this is a chunk of shoreline that we see as high risk, and we want to figure out where best to allocate that funding to implement it. We applied to the province through the regional district to get risk assessments on hydrological flood risk assessments on the whole rural area, and we didn't get that funding.
That's been done already, no?
No, it hasn't been done.
But what was the Dobson report? What was the other fellow that did the report?
Those, in my mind, and jump in here, Mark, if you disagree. From my perspective, those are very high-level assessments to say exactly like you see. Okay, here we're going to draw a line around this edge of Johnson Flats and say this is a risky area. But again, in order to prioritize those funds, we need to know where are those actual high-risk areas and where best do we allocate those funds, right? So that plan hasn't changed, but we haven't got the risk assessment to actually say this is where and how we need to allocate those funds, right? So it wouldn't, it seems logical that would be identified in that, but we can't just decide to go ahead and do it without having that assessment of where it needs to happen. So that part of DMAF is still fully in that package. It just hasn't been done yet.
When will it be done?
Permitting, sorry, also.
And then the fellow with the blue hat, you had a question or comment too.
Well, Anne, I think it's you.
Okay. Yep. So how come all the riprap work got done along the South Ruckle side so quickly when nothing could get done here if there's no money? I don't understand the priorities of where it was done 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That was done knowing that they wanted to buy that area out. Are we
not
just
South
not...
Reckle, right? Just to clarify that piece,
Okay,
right?
North
That's not done to
Reckle,
protect.
that area.
Yeah.
So how come all that riprap and all that got put in there and then it got fenced off so you can't even walk along there because it's private property? But we get nothing to even stop us from having 2 flood episodes this year at each end of the flats? Like, nothing makes sense, and that's what we're trying to ask you to do, is make sense to us so we understand. I don't understand all the D-map thing, all of that stuff. I don't need to know that, Rolly. I need to know why we're not having something done to protect us. I pay taxes.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Yeah. So fair question. Again, it comes down to, you know, we have to be prioritizing how those projects are implemented. I don't know enough about the South Reckle riprapping project to know. I can't intelligently speak to that, unfortunately, right? I don't know how that all played out. I don't know what that looks like. We can bring back that answer for you. But for my perspective, so I have 3,200 constituents spread across a whole lot of riverfront, right? I have to know, in order to make informed decisions, I need to know that whatever money we're allocating is allocated to the areas where it's going to have the best return on that investment, right? Whether it's going to protect the most lives, whether it's going to protect the most property, whatever that decision looks like, right? And I don't have the tools to make that decision right now. We do not have a risk assessment on the floodplain in Rural Grand Forks to make that decision.
So I think there was a huge risk assessment done that you do not even need to have a survey. Look at the people that went out there, and you were one of them, doing all the sandbagging, and they were there till 1:30 in the morning with lights on, you know, water up to whatever, freezing, to save us down here. Like that, to me, that is a huge risk assessment.
And walking by all that machinery
what
that was
if we
sitting there.
would have had, what if by chance there would have been one person that was seriously injured or lost, heaven forbid, lost their life? How could we as a community, as a city, how could you live with that? Like, that would be awful. Now there's a risk assessment. You don't need to do a study on it.
So I'm just gonna bring things back because I want to make sure we answered your question. Okay. You asked about the riprap downtown, why that happened first in lieu of John. So I just want to check with that, and then we'll come back and we're going to talk about the specific situation and some information that people don't have about that situation. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm getting between the city and the RDKB is that it doesn't matter how many taxes, how many properties are in the area here, we're not as important as any place else. We don't count. That's what we're hearing. And that's what I'd like an answer to.
So what I'm trying to say, that's not the case for me. I would respectfully disagree with that. For me to make decisions, I need to know that we're making well-informed decisions. And those decisions are made based on, for example, the risk of what's going to happen if we do that thing, what's going to happen if we don't do that thing. The risk to life is, as I said, number one, basically in all those decision-making criteria, and then how much impact we can have with the resources we have, because resources are not unlimited. So I would very much disagree with that statement, but that's how we have to prioritize. So
we're not feeling that, Rolly. We're not feeling that.
And so partly I think, and I understand that, right? I think that also, you know, I think that there has been recognition that we have to communicate better around DMAF, right? Just to explain, like the questions to say, you've got $55 million, why haven't you done anything? So far that project is pretty well on schedule, right? But clearly if people are saying, well, why haven't you done anything? It's because there's not enough fluid communication to say, here's where we're at, right? So that's, absolutely understand that, right?
Because we see nothing going on. We hear rumors, but we're not being, like, filled in on what really is going on, if anything. We just keep getting basically pushed to the side and said we can't protect ourselves, but yet we're told to protect ourselves. And if that was just put back to where it was, because obviously the homeowner did not build that dike, that was already there. If that was put back to where it was, like South Ruckles was, if the other end of Johnson Flats was put back to where it was, we wouldn't have had two different events this season.
So
that's what we're saying.
So let's say hypothetically.
Do we want, I'm just going to check in with everybody because we had one other comment over here. Do we want to talk about the specific situation right now after you respond to it?
I think it's pretty much the same
so
as everybody else has been asking.
A big
Something broke, why aren't we, that was existing, why aren't we replacing it? Because it did the job at the time.
Okay.
That's, I think, a big question around here.
Yeah, and that's fair. So, okay, so let's say we spend that $160,000, whatever it might cost, to put in a temporary berm over there, right? And then the house over there falls into the river because the water is being pushed across here, or South Ruckle is washed out because we have increased the speed and the volume of water going
We're not
past
asking
it.
for a change.
So there's the risk, right? That,
It's just if it's been, you'll have to explain to me, if it's been there all this time and it's done a job, why are you telling me putting it back exactly the same place is going to change the river?
Like 2000, before the flood of 2018.
Yeah.
It was there. It's just that it got damaged.
Okay, so again, in the midst of prep for the 2020 flood, in the middle of our response to that, we're seeing forecasts that were well beyond what we got in 2018. Okay, so then think about, let's say we put that temporary works in and nobody was hurt in the process of installing it, which was a legitimate concern once that machinery got moved down there, right? As I understand it, right, it was clear that there was too much water in the soil already. It was saturated. There was risk of life there. Okay, so let's say we did that and we got the floods that we were forecasted. It absolutely would have topped whatever berm we put in place because the other low spots are below what that berm would have been even. And then from my understanding of the risk assessment at that point is homes like this would be at enormous risk because instead of having a gradual increase in floodwater, we have a wall of water coming through here from a catastrophic failure in a piece of temporary protective work that we installed in the case where we had good reason to have a forecast, good reason to believe, based on a forecast, that we were expecting a flood that might be well beyond what that berm would be prepared to hold.
Okay,
And if I may, so that's all part of that assessment of risk, right? So if we have the Deputy Inspector of Dikes saying, no, this is not acceptable based on all of these risks, and we can't afford to fund it based on the risk, maybe not even the financial risk, but the risk to life, safety, first responders, property, any of those things, then we can't in good conscience make that decision to do that.
It sounds like there's a thirst for some information on basically the why of what, like the repairing of these structures. Maybe there's some technical kind of information that's missing from this meeting that would need to be brought forth to talk about the hydrology and some of the real effects of putting something in one place, how high the water is. It sounds like there's a bunch of technical questions that there's not the hydrologist here to answer.
I don't think you need a hydrologist to answer. We're just asking why all we wanted to have it done is to take back to the same level that it was in 2018. That's all that needed to be done.
So for example, who is going to be responsible for that berm at that point? Sorry?
And there's the problem.
Absolutely, because just to be clear, there's no problem. The RD will take that on, absolutely. But you are going to be paying for it, right? There's no big pool of money that we have somewhere that we use to fund anything. Everything in the regional district funding model is we tax for it, and then we provide it. We tax the people that receive the benefit, and we give that service back to those people. So just to be really clear, because I think that's misunderstood, right? So if we do install, if we went ahead, we would have to take ownership there. We'd have to work out with all of you who are landowners on the edge of the river. We have to own that property or have statutory rights away. We would then be taxing you guys for all of that work. So when we come to the part of this conversation that I think is productive is really what are we doing in the future? Absolutely, let's put that on the table and talk about it. But don't come into this with a false notion that there's going to be some massive pot of funding that is going to support this project, right? You guys, as the property owners, are the ones that are going to be carrying the burden of that expense. Even if we get grant funding, we still have to be prepared.
Can I just check in? Because I think there's some clarity on what you guys are asking and what you're responding. I see a disconnect. So clarify what you're asking.
Ronnie, can I ask you one question? How much of that $50 million, when they budgeted, was for Johnson Flats? Now, can we see a copy of the application? And why, if we can't, why not?
Deflect that one to staff.
You know the number?
I know the number for the areas outside of the city. It's 3 to 4 million, I believe it is, of the entire amount. But I'm not sure what component of that 3 to 4 million would apply specifically to Johnson Flats.
In 19th, my understanding, erosion work in that area, riprap, is around, I thought it was around 2 million. But that hasn't gone out to tender, so that's a very rough number.
So can we find out these numbers? Can you give us a copy?
Yeah.
Can you give us a copy of the application? That was the question.
I'd have to go back and look. I don't know the answer to that.
Sorry, I wasn't going to speak, but I guess I have to. The full application, the feds said that the entire package could not be released because there was some proprietary information in there from the companies that were doing some of the consulting work. But there are parts of it that are available, and I believe it was some of that was already posted on the flood recovery website, the bfre.ca. But I will have to go back and I will double check that for you guys and find out what can be presented and what can't. But there was some material that was, the companies that did some of the engineering was proprietary information that can't go out for competitive reasons.
Yeah,
but and certainly that point is heard loud and clear. And as I said, you know, I think that there's been a recognition. There needs to be more kind of constant communication around what is going on with DMAT. 100% understand that, and you know, with the exception of whatever we can't share, we'll figure out a way to share what you need to see.
Okay, and I'm just going to check in. So you finish clarify your question again, and then we are at 10 minutes after, so we got 20 minutes left.
Okay, the reason, I mean, the people here have gone through trauma a number of times, even this year with flooding, and I'm grateful for the people who helped, and the volunteers were amazing. I think that's why we need some communication. We're grateful, like we got the first question, why the DMAP work that was expected to be done wasn't done yet. I wanted to say that these residents have done their best to communicate. That's why they sent information about that area, the hole that was here. And we need to keep communicating moving forward. To be honest, I'm still a little confused about the emergency work and how that decision was made. You said danger for lives. Was it for the machinery? Did you think that the machinery would sink down or something? I'm confused about the statement about the machinery. And then I'm hearing that there was a concern in the risk assessment of it'd be like a weak dam that breaks and lets a bunch of water out quickly. But I was noticing in other parts of Grand Forks, temporary dams were being put up. Was that not a concern there? I'm confused why it was okay to put up these protective structures elsewhere and not here. So first, yeah, the machinery. And then
do you want Mark to speak to any of this?
If you would
I'm
like
happy to speak to this one. There are two safety issues. One was the responders, so the machinery operator, etc. So when the Deputy Inspector of Dikes and other staff went down to look at the property, they realized that the soil there was completely saturated with water. The machinery that was there, the 20-ton excavator, was already getting wallowed in the mud. And so there was a concern there that with the river flow undermining the shoreline there's a real hazard for first responders. The other issue was to build a berm, and remember the forecasts we were getting. There were some of the forecasts that were showing well over 2018 levels. To build a berm there that's 2 meters high or more would have been a poly-wrapped berm. And the concern was that once the water level breached that height, there would be a waterfall effect, and that would undermine the already saturated soil under the berm. And there could be, as Rolly had mentioned earlier, a catastrophic failure of that berm, which would release a 2-meter wall of water into this neighborhood, doing considerably more damage than if the water is allowed to rise slowly. And so that was the bigger concern in terms of public safety, and it would, the concern was also leading people to a false sense of security that they're behind a berm, and then having that berm fail and causing more damage than would otherwise be the case with the natural rise of the river.
And Mark, the berm in the downtown was designed to a higher flood risk standard, so it was to 200 years, whereas my understanding is doing any work down here wouldn't protect to the projections we were getting at that time.
And not because of the engineering of that particular berm, but because it would be high enough that water would be flowing overland other places that hadn't been eroded of that same berm. So it would be over the elevation of the other locations in that berm.
Okay, I understand that, but a question would be, why not tell us? You're not going to fix the berm. We're going to get hit by the river. Why not inform us that that's going to happen? Rather than us sitting on bated breath, waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen there. Thank the volunteers, they were wonderful to do something, because that did help us. But nobody told us, we're not going to fix the berm, so take your house, move it somewhere else, because you're going to lose it. There was no communication.
I can respond to that one. Yeah, up until that final day when the decision was made, the plan was to build those 2 berms. So for a couple of days, and we were putting the funding in place with Emergency Management BC, etc. And then the Deputy Inspector of Dikes came down. By that point, the soil was fully saturated, and the project had to be canceled at that point. So it was
why weren't we informed? I think that was a big hassle
So the fellow behind you's had his hand up very clearly for a little bit, and then we'll go next, and then we'll go over here.
I'd just like to maybe ask to talk about the decision-making process. Everybody's telling me about the BC River forecast and their ridiculous numbers that made absolutely no sense from the very beginning. As a homeowner in Johnson Flats, I followed the Laurier and the ferry predictions, which were right on the money. I would like to know who makes the decisions, who is holding BC River forecasts to putting their feet to the fire for making those ridiculous predictions that had people freaking out and suggesting we were like, are we going to sandbag? My house is going to be disappearing with the rest of Grand Forks and flooding down into Ferry, Washington at the rate things are going. Why would I even bother? Who thought that those predictions were realistic and based their response on those predictions? That's my first question. I'll tell you what, I'll allow that answer to be answered because I find that just a ridiculous premise on which to base your predictions.
Okay, I think I would like to answer that one, because I think from my understanding is politically, everybody around our table agrees with that. Your assessment there is particularly that we have a serious problem with the River Forecast Center in terms of the volatility of the predictions they're giving us. And personally, I don't think that they recognize the emotional toll. Somebody mentioned that, right? The emotional toll that takes on us when they're telling us one day that it's going to be a flood like we've never seen before, and then 10 hours later they're saying, oh, it's going to be a 1 in 5 year flood. We've already got unanimous support from the RD board, the regional district board, to move that forward provincially to say, look, we got to fix this situation. And likewise, we have a provincial flood and wildfire advisory committee. I've already lodged that concern with that group. So happy to talk more, but we're all on the same page on that. That being said, we can't ignore that information either. Right?
Did you consider what Barry and Laurier were saying and the historical history that goes with the BC River forecast and how out of whack they are constantly
Luke wants to answer that one. Did we consider it?
Yes, absolutely. And echo Director Russell's comments there. The forecaster from the River Forecast Center actually a few days before the flood, when he was forecasting some fairly high peaks, reminded us that in 2018 for the Granby they were right on with their forecast, and that the American models at Ferry and Laurier were off. So we have to be very careful in dismissing data that's provided for us through a provincial agency like that.
I'm not an expert.
Nor am I.
And when I look down, I go into the mountains and I'm measuring with my probe, there was no way we were going to be at 28 feet. And I am not an expert. I just want to know, somebody needs to have their feet held to the fire because they cost a lot of money, a lot of heartache, and a lot of grief. And if this person just has to say, well, I'm sorry, it was a mistake.
Can I respectfully interrupt, given that you had another question? And I would really like to have some time to talk about what the future is as opposed to what the past is.
So let's get this second question, and we've got two more, and then we'll move on. Yep.
Yeah, you talked about the saturated ground. That was going to be dealt with by my place at 19. Well, why was the pin pulled on that? There was no saturated ground or nothing. So what happened? I just want to know what happened because I had 3 guys come down there 3 separate times say, don't worry about it. We get over 25 millimeters of rain, which we almost got 50. We're building the dike. So I can see this over here, but you're not saying what happened over there. Why the pin got pulled on.
The reason apparently from those that were making the decision was the same. It was a balance of risks. They were concerned that if, considering once again the context, that the levels of water that were being forecast, if the water level breached that dike and there was a catastrophic failure of that berm, it would cause more damage to the community than otherwise would occur with the natural flow.
So it sounds like a need for more information about some of the decision-making processes for some of the specific protective woods. The fellow with the green jacket, I'm sorry I don't know your name.
Before we move on to positive future outcomes, getting back to what happened over my place over here, I still haven't had any word whether the mess of the machinery that was sent over there by you guys, I haven't had any confirmation whether it's going to get cleaned up or not. So I'd like, before we move on to the future, it'd be nice to have that addressed.
So I'm happy to tackle that one, or you can. So as far as we're aware, right, so as you know, right, there was people down there looking at that, but there was a desire to get that berm built, get that berm established, right? Then again, there's provincial approvals that we need to receive in order to give the go-ahead for that, right? And so those were in the works. Please jump in if I'm missing any key details here. In the process, the forecasts we were getting were fluctuating wildly. So at first, the forecast was a moderately high flood that berm that was proposed would actually protect against. Yeah. And then we're getting a forecast that's saying you can invest that money in that berm, that temporary protective work. It's still going to get overtopped or become rendered basically useless because water is going to be so high it's going to be flowing over land all over the place. In that interim period, that's when the ground then became saturated. My understanding is that the contractor involved there, with a desire to seeing that there was work that needed to get done, wanted to start that work. Our operation chief never gave the approvals to say, yes, go ahead. And so that's an issue. I understand you and I have talked about it, right? Mm-hmm. We'll certainly try to help figure out how to navigate that to get it cleaned up. But from our understanding, there was no formal approval given, and I think again, it's a situation where we have a community that wants to help, and my understanding was that in that case, that contractor wanted to start working on that before there was formal approvals given.
Right. Well, I never invited him on my place. I gave the emergency response people permission to come on my land, and they were very specific about what they wanted to do there. And I was there when the contractor initially showed up, and they were very specific about what they told him they wanted.
Yeah.
From him. And what happened after that, I do not know. But I certainly had no. I did not invite him on there, and now basically government officials invited him on my place. I don't know what was said. Either it was poor communication, not great project management. I don't know, but I know with the work I do, if I start a job, or if I'm thinking of a job, I do not let my contractor start any work until everything is lined up, and so I find it hard to believe that he just started work on his own. But that really has nothing to do with me as far as I'm concerned. But I got left with a big mess there, and I don't think it should be up to me to have to deal with him, because I think you guys need to step up, take responsibility for whatever actions members of your team took at the time, and deal with problems.
Here,
And
I agree.
I agree too. The way, like, that statement, fully agree, right? We if it was our mistake, 100%, we would be figuring out a way to fix it. As it is, to the best of my knowledge, it was a misunderstanding somewhere. I don't know where it is. We're still trying to, I'm still trying to understand exactly how that happened. I still think we need to help you figure out how to clean it up. But from our perspective, that was not a decision that we made to move forward with that. That notice of approval was never given. So I 100% agree with what you're saying, and we will help you try to figure out how to fix that and clean it up. But to the best of my knowledge, just so that everyone's aware, right, that was not the emergency response team saying, yes, start this work, and then saying, no, stop this work. It was, again, and this is, you know, the uncomfortable part, as I understand it, it was a contractor who saw a need that he wanted to address and started working to address it. Given, as you say, the plans were in place. It wasn't ambiguous about what was going to happen there. It was just, it was the decision about whether or not the funding was going to be there to implement it.
Yeah, I get, just to fill in on that funding part, there's a process that we go through with Emergency Management BC. Anytime we're expending funds on an emergency response, we have to go through, it's called an expense authorization form process. So in order to get approval for funding on that, we needed quotes from the contractor in terms of what the costing was. So that when the contractor was down initially, that's what the emergency management staff were speaking with him about. What would be your cost to do that project? He gave us some costing. The costing didn't include the material, so there was a delay. And in that period, before we received any sort of funding approval from Emergency Management BC, that whole process was still in the stream. The contractor began work there. And so there was certainly, from what I've heard from Emergency Operations Center staff, no go-ahead. We didn't receive an expense authorization form approval, which is our green light that we're going to get the funding back from the province for any expenditure. So we never authorize any work to be done without that approval, because otherwise the regional district is on the hook for those costs. So we will help you, as Rolly has said, absolutely help you in working with the contractor to get the situation.
Could we leave that there for now, just because we're getting to the end of our time, and I'll move. There was a comment or question over here.
No, that's fine.
So over here, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so I don't know everybody's names, so I'll have to say bye in the strike.
My name's Ray Morass. No, now you go. I'm the one responsible for the sign. As you come down the hill there where it says thank you for not helping, you guys did nothing. What you guys, all of you, have to ask yourself is, what are you going to do to make me want to go take that sign down? It's going to be there for years, and we're going to escalate the pressure on you guys to give us some help. Even if you want to just donate 40 truckloads of rock somewhere, just pile it up, we'll come and get it, we'll do our dike vigilantism, and we'll fix it ourselves. That way there's no liability on anybody, and we don't have to worry every May that we're going to flood. I've been here now for 13 years. The last 4 years we flooded 3 times. This is absolutely asinine. I can't live like this. I have a shop downtown. We flood all the time, or threats of. How the hell am I supposed to live in this community? I'm feeling like the biggest mistake I've made in my life is investing in this town. With that being said, one question. When you guys buy out the other end of town, there's some of the houses, who's going to own that land?
City.
Is that city? Is that?
City will.
The city will own that.
Yeah, and the
so
property.
then if the water comes up there and floods our end down there, who's responsible for that?
I'm not sure where your end is. So.
Oh, sorry, the far end.
So you're talking
South
about
end.
North Ruffle? Yeah.
No, we're talking about north 12.
Come down the hill.
Oh, okay, yeah. So there's three properties in there. Sorry, I thought you were talking about North Ruffle. I'm not sure on that land if it'll go back to Redfearn as far as high water mark, or if it'll actually be owned by the city. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, if it goes back to the city or whoever it goes to, I want the sand out of there. We're going to put it in like big 4x4x4 bags, and we're going to build ourselves a dike. We're going to do it all over the place. And I don't want to look at this end, that end, the middle. We're all in this together. We've got to stay together, or we're going to get crushed. This is it's insanity. I can't believe how the city and the RDKB is just like, oh well, we're not fixing it because the water came up. Oh well, we're not going to fix it. Well, the water's down. No point. So anyway, that's my rant.
Keep in mind there are two very different conversations here. One of which was meant to be explained how decisions are made around temporary protective works. Temporary protective works have to be removed, right? We don't install a temporary protective work in the midst of an emergency, a flood situation, and leave it in place, because it's a different process to install permanent protective works. The discussion around the permanent protective works, part of that is within DMAF. Part of, as you know, like Len, you're referring to that Dobson report. There's a proposals in there, for example, to elevate houses, to try to find funding to raise houses. Well, it became very clear that DMAF was not going to allow that. So those pieces, we have to try to find other funding to do that, right? Those are permanent solutions, right? As opposed to the temporary. So just as long as we keep those two conversations separate, right? We're not saying we're not going to do anything here because the water came up. We're saying we couldn't go forward, justify to build that temporary protective work over there, given the risks involved.
I think we understand that.
Okay.
I guess my point, the way I'm feeling is, if you're going to help us, then can you help us? If you're not going to help us, supply us with some materials to do it. If you don't want to do that, then stay the hell out of here. That's. I'm not speaking for anybody else but me. That's the way I feel. I'll just do it.
And I'm just going to check over here because you've asked a couple questions. If anybody else who hasn't had a chance yet, you haven't had a chance yet. Yeah, go ahead.
In 2018, we put a little section in, and it was all the homeowners themselves and volunteers. If we hadn't did that, we'd have been in the same predicament we were 2018. It would have came right to our houses, just like it did the last time. Because nothing's been done. The only reason it was done is we did it ourselves. We didn't get no help.
Anything that was done in Johnson Flats was done by volunteers. Nobody else. All you people are standing here and telling us a whole bunch of excuses. But the only way we could save ourselves is just like what Ray said, is to do it ourselves. Because we're not getting any help from the city, from nobody. All we do is you guys keep saying, well, this is that and that, and we're studying it and all that. In the meantime, every goddamn year, Johnson Flats is flooding. Is that supposed to encourage people to move to Grand Forks? Because it sure is not working worth a shit. Because we're not getting any help.
So
that doesn't have to happen. But we did it. You were there yourself, Rolly. All this is being done by whom? So you guys are all standing here. You're getting money from someplace. What the hell are you doing with it?
I think that money is, you can speak to that, right?
I might come back to the same model. If we give you a bunch of sand here, we charge you for it, right? Like there's no money coming from other places here, right? So that's the future solution conversation.
The money's coming from us.
That's right. So yeah, if you would like to do that, we'll work it out. We can design a service. We can get you a service here. We can tax you to give you a bunch of sand to do something like that, right?
We're already paying taxes.
Yeah, but look, absolutely.
What happened to all the money from the government?
So yeah, we can look for grants, right? We can do that. We do that, right?
Well, we just got a grant, $50 million. What happened to it?
That's right. And in that $50 million, there's money allocated to help protect the shoreline in that Dobson. So we look to our experts and say, how do we do this, right? How do we do this? How do we protect as best we can with the resources we have. So that's part of it, right? The shoreline armoring, this is part of the equation. We haven't got there yet, right? It hasn't been done yet. We would all love it to be done yet. I would love it to be done, but it's not, right? It's not as simple as, for us particularly, if we're going to be responsible, it's not as simple as buying a bunch of loads of fill and dumping it on the edge of the river, right? We have to jump through the hoops that are necessary to make sure it is safe, and we're aware of those risks, so that Len and Carol, you don't lose your house from something that we did short-sightedly.
Well, you had 2 years to do nothing. How many more years is it going to take?
So I'm happy to hear that. You know, like, I'm willing to sit here and listen to it, but it doesn't do any good for me, right? Okay. It doesn't do any good to see a sign to me that says thanks for nothing. Okay? I don't think that you appreciate how much energy and time has been spent by a great number of people in local government to try to help get solutions here. Even this scenario for the temporary works here, that doesn't just happen, right? There's a huge amount of work that goes in to trying to get to that point of the process, right? That doesn't happen everywhere, okay? We have a lot of good people putting a lot of time into trying to help you.
So really, I think maybe one of the things that I hear, and I do hear what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying, but you know what? It's communication as well, right? And you've said this yourself, that maybe we need to have more of an open communication and more of an understanding, right? But right now, we're at the point that, like, we just need help, and we need to know what we can do. That's kind of the bottom line.
And I agree. I very much agree.
I'm just, because we're at 6:30, I'm going to shift over to the person here who didn't have a chance to say anything. And then I'm going to summarize a couple points I've heard to make sure I've heard them correctly, because we're going to take those back.
I have a suggestion as far as you refer to that we're going to get taxed for it. We all pay property taxes, some of us a lot. And I'm not even on the river most of the time. But what's the percentage that the city and the RDKB get from our taxes? Can that percentage be forgiven one season and pay for the sand and the stuff that we're asking for to protect ourselves? Like, that's all we want to do, is protect ourselves so we can continue paying taxes. We have a way. 2 years ago, after the flood dried out a little bit, Paul and I and Graham walked the other end, and he saw what we did to protect us. Without that, Joe's right, we would have gotten wet again this year. If we do that, and we're all willing to do it, none of us have the money to do that. So where can we get that? Can we take it out of our taxes, Mr. Mayor? Otherwise, we can't afford to keep paying our taxes because our property's being ruined. And we're all trying to move because we can't live here anymore. And this is our livelihood, our retirements, everything that we're throwing on the line. And if there's some way that we could work that out to pay for it, trade it off, we'll do the work. All the neighborhood would do it. So is that something that we could put on the table and even consider?
The trading it off is a challenge, because again, it's and I'm speaking for the regional district model, which again covers the city of Grand Forks, right? So if we decide on a plan for Johnson Flats, it's going to be a regional district, and the regional district serves as that tool to share those costs, whatever that looks like, right? So a trade-off, I don't know what exactly you mean there. We can talk more maybe later about that, but it certainly provides the option to defer those costs, so to spread those over time, right? So if we design a service in the regional district, like for example, if we decide that Johnson Flats wants to move ahead with a $15 million project there, it wouldn't be $15 million all in a lump sum. We'd certainly go try to find grants wherever possible. So let's say we reduce it by a few $1 million because we managed to get some grants. The remainder would be put to all the residents to say, do you want to sign up for this service? Do you want to agree? And it would be taxation over time. So we'd borrow money on your behalf, basically, and then it would be a payment over time. So that helps ease the financial impact over time, at least.
So the money that the city got is gone?
No.
There is no more money, or we never got any of it. What are you guys doing with the money?
You might not have heard the earlier discussion, so do you want to summarize the key point?
So for this piece particularly, we need to get the hydrological risk assessment that tells us exactly how to spend that money.
Don't
that
have the money
to
yet.
be clear.
Don't have the money yet.
That money, to be clear, is focused at armoring, not at building a dike, because that dike, we have the numbers, right? And so we see what that is to figure out where that is. So that's still ongoing. It just hasn't been done yet.
Wow.
Just for clarification.
So I just want to get the fellow over here because he's had his hand up for a long time and I skipped him once.
Okay,
and then I'll
lots
come.
of people talking without hands up.
I know.
Put my hand
No,
up.
I know. So let's go. Let's go. The fellow in green. Okay, he's deferred to you.
Sorry, I wanted to double check. Did North Ruckle get flooded this year?
Some groundwater, that was it.
Okay, so Johnson Flats has gotten flooded 3 times in 4 years, and this is not usual for us. That we should at some point talk about that and how we can decrease that risk and some of the contributing factors. But the other thing is, if we're paying attention to what's happening with nature, I think that when we get this report done, that we should be putting a priority on the highest risk location, which is here. That means whatever needs to be done should be done quick, because for a big flood, it looks like this is the highest risk place already, because look at what's happening, right? Clearly, this is the first place to flood, and then in a big flood, it might be bigger here. So I guess I just wanted to say, I think we felt like we were last priority, but I think nature's showing us that we should pay attention and try to figure out what's going to be done, and as quickly as possible. And if permanent structures can't be done quickly, then I think we should have maybe some short-term, some kind of protection to decrease the risk.
Because these guys got to get to a meeting. Quick question here, and then I don't remember your name. Paul wanted to hear a little bit about the future, and then we're going to have to stop.
Yeah, to heck with it, Rolly. I agree with you. To heck with the past. Let's talk about the future.
So let's just go to this fellow's question here because he's been so patient.
Thank you for making the effort, everybody. Just as a private property owner, you talk about temporary dikes and what have you. If I wanted to put something on my property at the borderline, can you stop me?
No.
Yeah, as long as it's not within the repairing area where the ministry requires approval. For example,
my property
here
line
you
ends.
could put a berm, a setback berm
just for
on the
example,
property.
this is their property line along the fence, and they wanted to bring 40 loads of dirt in, nobody can stop them. Okay, just wanted to know that.
Okay,
so just to clarify, because I'm not sure everybody heard that answer, right? It's basically no. That is a key tenet of our entire emergency kind of planning process. Is, personal responsibility for protecting property. If you want to do that on your property, as long as you're not below the natural boundary of the river, that's your prerogative.
Let's do it.
Sorry.
I'm just saying.
And let's just end with you.
That berm over there, you guys better look after it, because if that berm's not there, none of us are going to be down here.
Okay, so noted, and Paul wanted to end on a comment about the future or some sort of discussion.
Let's hear
of the
about
future.
the future a bit.
So setting aside the fact that there's some components within DMAP that are still ongoing and will happen, okay? So setting those pieces aside, because they are predominantly focused at shoreline armoring and where exactly that ought to be and so on. So the question for you guys, again, the regional district as that model of delivering that service, it's what you guys want. So if you said, yeah, our neighborhood, our community wants a service that does such and such and such, it's our job then to go figure out how much it's going to cost, bring that question back to you and say, here's how much it's going to cost, do you agree to do it? And if the majority of the people agree, majority or 2/3? Majority. So if 51% of the people say, yeah, we want to do that, then that's what we do, right? Our model is 100% service by service by service. So that would be the option going forward, right? Is let's figure out what makes sense, and we can help you figure out how to deliver that in the most logical way. There's a spectrum of options, right? There's the option of just based on our land use bylaws and policies and so on, and that would be that's essentially to say this area this is not a happy position to be in, but to say simply we don't see that gradually get fewer and fewer people living here because it's such high risk and we cannot protect it permanently. The next kind of option is in that shoreline armoring, like keep erosion from happening, but don't try to stop a flood. Okay, and then the next kind of scale of option would be in that space of, okay, well, does it make sense to put some protective works and actually try to hold back floodwater? And that would be your dikes and berms and so on, right? So for us, that would be diking, right? If it's going to be a formal protective piece, this permanent, it's going to be a dike. In that Dobson report and in the secondary report, I forget the author of that one.
Alan Thompson.
Alan Thompson. So we had those two reports. They're not detailed analysis, but they're reports that lay out some options, right? So for Johnson Flats, there's a couple options in that Dobson report that said, okay, let's try to buy out, like, you know, remove 30 or 40 homes from the I'm not sure if I got that number right. Remove a handful of homes. I'll come back with the number. Raise a number of homes. Elevate the roads, right? So 12th, I think, is that one right there, right? So yep. Raise 12th and raise that one.
That's 12.
That's 12.
That's 19.
12th and 19th, yeah. Right? So use those as protective works. There's an option, and there's a price tag, right? They said, okay, that would probably cost around $10 million. So inevitably, those are estimates of costs end up creeping up, but there's an option for you, right? Or the other option that was presented there is say, okay, well, how much hypothetically would it cost to dike all of Johnson Flats? $15 million was that estimate, right? It's almost inevitably a low estimate, but that's how much that would cost. And that's ignoring, please keep in mind, it's ignoring the risk to the across the river and downstream, because the province would not allow us to do anything like that if they can document that it's increasing, if it's just transferring that flood risk to other properties that are going to cause greater damage. Okay? So just before you get in there, so we're open to whatever conversation makes sense. Okay, I don't see, frankly, there's no easy solution here, right? There's no good scenario to put on the table and say, this is the path forward. But we're open to figuring out what that looks like with you, recognizing that we have to make decisions based on that balancing of risk.
There's confusion in North Rocco and Johnson Flats. Some people, not everyone, wondering why is North Rocco being chosen as the floodplain when Johnson Flats already seems to be? Why was the decision made to make them the floodplain and just give a little minor protection, and leave us at risk? Like, it's a bit confusing because I'm hearing that forecasts are high for this area. So why an elevated area that's not as not as high risk of flooding to the same extent? Why are you trying to turn it into a floodplain if that's not what nature's doing? I'm confused. And
so
is that going to work?
Rather than making that same proposal for Johnson Flats and some areas of Johnson Flats,
if the goal is to protect the city center, why would you choose the higher elevation area to turn into a floodplain when nature might be saying something else to us? And will it even work?
I'm going to stop it there because I know two people have to be at 7 o'clock meetings. I'm just going to summarize really quickly, and we've got it on recorded too, so I can look back. But I heard that communication needs to improve, and you need to know the real goods right away, like everybody. Good, bad, or indifferent, you want to know.
Correct.
I heard that you want to understand this funding, and you want to know what proportion exactly is coming to Johnson Flats out of that big package, $50 million, and if so, when and how.
Yeah, perfect.
You want to know about specific issues to do with properties, which is the damage that was done to your property and also the dike that's on your property, right? You want more. There's more information needed there, and arguably actions. I also heard that there is some interest in having a discussion, or maybe some sort of further meeting about a possible service to allow people to actually do their own protective works within the confines of the riparian rules for the province or whatever they are on your own property. And I also heard, just what I gathered from people's questions, is there's probably an appetite for some good hard science and hydrological information from people who do this kind of thing for a living and understand what the implications are of one structure one place, another structure another place, and how the water moves around.
And the past is past. We want to talk about the future.
Exactly, that being part of it, the technical.
That's exactly. How that was done, and that's stupid, and that's stupid, everything is stupid.
What's going to be stupid?
So let's figure out what the hell is stupid.
Okay.
And I need, and Brian, we need your input in terms of what you want to do, right? Recognizing, please, in that conversation, that it's not all free, right? So we need to hear what the solutions are that make sense to you, and how we move forward to help deliver that.
So this is not the last meeting, it's the first meeting.
Good.
And whatever those future meetings look like, we need to find a way to come back to you and work with you on what those other meetings should look like. And we'll leave it there because these guys got to go to another meeting.
Okay.
So thank you for hosting us.
Yes, thank you, Len and Carol, for hosting us.
And having us in your community. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, my dear. You make